verify identification before you gotta be aboard.
Oh, yeah.
'Cause I will not be responsible for stealing a man's car.
Late on a Saturday night last May, a handful of ICE agents and a state trooper are standing around a gas station parking lot in South Nashville.
Were we really at 8? Shit, I thought we only had like 4 or 5.
We're at 8.
Yeah. Just us, right?
Yeah.
Damn, I lost track of count.
It's just after midnight, and ICE has detained a man named Marcos after the trooper pulled him over. They told him he can call his brother and roommates to come get his vehicle. Their hope, they say, is that his friends are also immigrants and that they can detain them too.
Never miss an opportunity.
I think, yeah, him who's number 8.
Just call them to the wolf's den. Never miss an opportunity.
Hopefully they roll up in a big truck, a bunch of them, and it's like, well, there's 9, 10, 11, and 12.
As they stand waiting, they compare how many arrests they've made, laughing, almost like it's a game.
So that record's been standing for about 5 years, so you never know.
At one point, an agent gets impatient.
But they're coming, right?
That's what they said, yeah.
All right, we'll give them like 5 minutes because we're cutting into hunting time.
We're cutting into hunting time, he says. Within minutes, after the friends arrive, ICE detains all 3 of them, just like that. Over the past several months, the Nashville Banner has been reviewing more than 50 hours of body cam footage from a week-long operation the Tennessee Highway Patrol and ICE carried out in Nashville last May. Over the course of 6 nights, THP and ICE made more than 600 traffic stops in the city's predominantly immigrant neighborhoods. The footage reveals a pattern of demeaning conduct from law enforcement. They appeared to racially profile drivers, demean those they pulled over, in some cases disparaging them and preventing them from contacting their families. What's more, our analysis of immigration records and the footage contradicts law enforcement claims that the operation was about targeting criminals. We published 2 major stories, one detailing the operation and the other following up with those detained and deported and the families and communities they left behind. This work was done in partnership with Lighthouse Reports, Mother Jones and the Center for Investigative Reporting, News Channel 5, Nashville Noticias, and the Institute for Public Service Reporting. In this special episode, we're going to dive into what we found. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. Our team that's been analyzing the ICE raids includes reporters Sarah Grace Taylor, Stephen Elliott, and Araceli Crescencio. And they're here with me now. Now, we just heard some excerpts from that first night. What were your first impressions when you were reviewing the footage?
I think it's immediately striking that the stops don't seem to be about public safety, but about catching as many immigrant or suspected immigrant drivers as they could in South Nashville.
Yeah, I think some of the videos that I've watched, what grabs at me first is the emotion in some of the people that get pulled over when they realize that they're getting, or that they're being turned over to ICE. It's that immediate fear because at first they think that they're maybe going to get a ticket, but when it becomes clear that they're going to be detained, it's like the fear in their face is so heartbreaking.
Well, is it the initial stop always, I've noticed something with your taillight or something wrong with your car? Isn't that the premise?
Yes, and THP told us back at the time that this was a traffic safety endeavor. But, you know, as we saw in a lot of the videos, some of these stops were for things that, as they admitted in the video, the troopers admitted in at least one of the videos that they don't usually stop people for things like this. Pretty minor violations like tint on a window or a tag that's hanging askew, something like that.
Sarah Grace, at the beginning of the operation, how prepared or well briefed did the state troopers appear?
So what we looked at is all from the first night, which was a Saturday night into a Sunday morning. Especially in the early hours of that footage, it's really obvious that there wasn't a lot of preparation for this, and that, I saw ICE and THP unclear how to handle people's vehicles, whether to tow them or allow people to come pick them up. ICE agents struggling to share their location via iPhone with each other to come and pick people up from stops. Discussion of whether people were allowed to contact their families and all sorts of different details that you would think would have been worked out ahead of time. There was a constant complaint from ICE that they were going to lose all their handcuffs, which led to troopers offering to use leg shackles and one ICE agent saying that he would be happy to diesel chain a son of a bitch if they ran out of handcuffs.
How worried were they about potentially arresting the wrong people?
That's a good question. There's one exchange where an ICE agent very early on in the operation is saying, well, I'm not sure if we should take this person in because they don't have a criminal background and we're not sure if they're legal. But then they call a supervisor because another ICE agent points out they said to take absolutely everyone in. The supervisor tells him to take them in, and then the ICE agent complains that he'd rather be catching shitbags and criminals than dealing with all of the piddly stops they were making.
And how were they verifying status? Did they have to call a number? Were they on radios? How did that work?
So a lot of what ICE does is in an app, but some of the resources that they use are hotlines, like the Law Enforcement Support Center, I think, LESC, is kind of the primary one that they were trying to call, and they would say, here's somebody's name and date of birth, or name and social security number if they had one. Can you verify? And then at the same stop where this ICE agent was concerned about who all they were going to arrest, they were commenting on the fact that they have now overwhelmed this system because of the spike in calls from this operation that night. And so they couldn't get a hold of anybody, and that's why they end up calling the supervisor, who just tells them to take them in, even uncertain. And there's another instance, another supervisor comes to a scene and says, well, go ahead and bring them in, and if we have to cut them from the office, we will. So they were certainly casting a wide net.
How busy was that call-in?
I would guess pretty busy. There were 8 troopers, so each trooper was assigned a team of ICE agents, and they were out doing these stops, and then there were some agents going between stops to transport people. So there were 8 teams here in Nashville, and there were times where the stops are only seconds apart because there's so many people out doing the same thing on the same side of town.
This was a huge undertaking. You had 52 some hours of video footage to look at, and you have to look very carefully and listen very closely. Mm-hmm. How did you do that?
Slowly. I think I ended up with 16,000 words and notes, and these are like sentence fragment notes, but I just went through every video. Sometimes that was 3 different videos of the same stop because there might be backseat, dash cam, and body cam, but you'd hear different pieces because they're not entirely lined up. I just went through it. Some stops I only watched once because it was pretty straightforward, but I might flag it as like a quick release or uninteresting or whatever that looked like. Some stops where there was more dialogue, I might have to go back through it a few times and hear what they said. When I set out, I don't think we were really looking for anything particular. We just wanted to see what the conduct was and if there was evidence of profiling. And really quickly, I was hearing some of the kind of shocking things they said. I saw the first person be written on with a marker within the first handful of videos I watched, and it became clear to me that we were going to be looking for things we didn't know we were looking for as far as conduct was concerned. So the footage that I went through is a little over 50 hours that TIRC, the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, got from the Tennessee Highway Patrol. So that's some in-car camera, so dash camera or backseat camera if somebody was in custody. And then body cam footage. There were like 150 stops the first night. We don't have all of those yet, but we have a majority of it. ICE is not wearing anything. So what you see is all from a trooper's perspective. And often they reference, especially ICE will reference that a trooper's wearing a camera, and then you'll hear them cut themselves off or revisit a conversation later. There are a couple of instances where a trooper takes their body cam off before they take someone out of the back seat.
Really?
And then there were pretty extreme audio redactions that THP did after the fact. So I think the longest one I saw is around 12 minutes of audio fully redacted. And it's just troopers and ICE agents standing behind a THP vehicle talking after a stop, which is where a lot of this kind of conduct stuff that we saw happened.
Well, Stephen, 609 total stops over 6 days, I think was the final number. Who was being pulled over? Who was being let go?
We have a few different sources of information for that. One is the video from the first night, which is obviously incomplete. You can kind of get a sense of the type of people that they're pulling over. We also have a list of names that we pulled from 2,000 pages of these incident reports from the full operation, the full week. And we wrote about this last year, but we kind of dug back into them again, and their names kind of buried in some of these documents. They're not always in the part that says name. Sometimes they're just in this...
In the narrative?
Yeah, in the bottom where they're kind of listing a few different facts. So we compiled all these names. We tried to identify as many of them as possible. It's obvious from our analysis and other people's analysis where these stops were happening. They were happening in certain parts of Nashville, specifically South Nashville, where a lot of the immigrant population lives. However, when you watch the video, there are all kinds of people that get stopped. One thing that Sarah Grace found in reviewing the video is that there are a lot of instances where they pull up on a car, they immediately clock that the person is white or a Black American, and even if they have committed some sort of traffic infraction, they're immediately let go. So there is a discrepancy in how people are treated, but a lot of different types of people are pulled over. I did interview a man who was deported to Jamaica, who was stopped during this, and he ended up riding around in one of the vans from stop to stop for a few hours that night. And he said that from his perspective, they were only stopping certain types of vehicles. So older vehicles, 2000 to 2010 kind of era vehicles, certain models. And his inference from that was that they were looking for lower income people.
Araceli, you managed to keep in touch with and interview some of these people who were detained last May. Tell us some of those stories. Maybe you can start with Eduardo.
It was pretty challenging to get a hold of some of these folks because it had been a few months since the operation, and many of them are now readjusting to a new life in different countries. Eduardo in Monterrey, Mexico, and at first maybe they were a little bit hesitant to talk to you because they're kind of trying to move on with their lives. But he was always struck me as a chatty man who kind of wanted to share his story. I knew from the get-go that he was interested in talking. And his story is also just pretty wild in the sense that he gets to Mexico, to Monterrey, after being deported. And he was first in Mexico City. Then they just give him a card. He has to make his way back home after 29, 30 years of not being there. So he immediately says, as soon as I get off the bus and I'm in Monterrey, the city is so different. There's buildings all over. I don't recognize this. And so by memory, he kind of makes it to his aunt's home. And that's where he's able to contact his brother for the first time.
And his shock is pretty evident on the video, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. In the first few minutes, he kind of is confident that he's not going to be detained. He kind of thinks that it's like a routine stop, maybe. He shows them his identification, and for a good few minutes, he's not worried. And then immediately his face changes when he kind of finds out that he's going to be switched over to the custody of ICE. And that's when he starts heavy breathing, panting. His words are kind of difficult to understand. And at first he was pretty fluent in conversating with some of these officers, in English. And so he was, you could understand him. And then at the end, you just really couldn't. They ask him if he wants to take anything from his car, some of his belongings. And he's just no, and pretty in shock.
Sarah Grace, is it true that the most serious offenders nabbed in this entire operation were not necessarily taken out of traffic stops?
So back at the beginning, right after this operation, or maybe even while it was still going on, ICE claimed to have arrested 5 very serious criminals, couple of drug charges, one person allegedly associated with MS-13, one person with a rape conviction. And they named these individuals. They put out a release and said, we got these people as a result of this operation. What we found working with Lighthouse, a reporter over there saw that these folks were listed as arrested during some sort of supervised release, so think parole or probation. And I was able to confirm that at least 2 of these 5 individuals were picked up at appointments related to their parole or probation. So while ICE might have you think like this traffic operation resulted in these 5 arrests, we think it's 0 to 3 of those arrests that might have actually been related, which when you look at 600 stops and then somewhere between 150 and 200 arrests, if you can only come up with 3 serious arrests, it kind of undermines some of the public safety claims.
The law enforcement force was split into teams, I guess, for efficiency or whatever, but how quickly was it evident that there was a competition brewing?
In some trooper teams, it was evident the first stop. So they were very quickly oh, we got one. And then there would be radio chatter where someone would mention having stopped a car with 4 people. And people would get admittedly jealous of that and want to stop more people. In instances where a white or a black person or someone who in no way indicated that they might be an immigrant were encountered by troopers, they were rushing the stop so quickly that sometimes they didn't even run licenses. And these sometimes were speeding by up to 27 miles per hour over the speed limit. So there was very much a hurry up and go get more people. I think the most obvious thing for how they were competing is that in 3 instances we saw them Sharpie onto people's arms, apparently denoting a team that they were on.
Actually right on their skin.
Right. So the first one I saw, a supervisor's on site and says, did you write on him or did you mark him or something like that? And THP tells ICE, oh, I have a Sharpie if you need it. And then they go and they write T4 on someone's arm. And I didn't know what that meant, and we were trying to figure out what might that mean. But then we saw it happen in another video where someone's already in custody in the back of a vehicle. And then finally I saw a video where a woman is in custody. Her boyfriend's already been put in the back seat in custody. And she's standing with multiple agents around her, and another agent walks up and says, did you give her the mark of the beast? And then the trooper says, what? And he said, we have to mark her Team 6, mark of the beast. And then they go and write Team 6 on this woman's arm with a Sharpie, and then return to the vehicle to go mark the boyfriend. And apparently this marking wasn't about some official designation, it was just about which team made the arrests, which kind of plays into the idea that they were competing to make the most arrests that night.
Wow. Some of these details are shocking.
I've never seen anything like that, and I don't think the troopers had based on the way they responded when they saw ICE do it.
I'm Demetria Kalodimos, and you're listening to a special episode of Banner & Company, diving into our months-long investigation into last May's ICE operation. You can read our full investigation at NashvilleBanner.com. We'll be right back. When we launched Banner & Company more than a year ago, we wanted to help you get to know your Nashville neighbors. One of the best ways to know a neighborhood is to tap into the experience of a realtor or two who really know the city and the region. Richard Courtney and Lisa Peebles are a pair to draw to, as they say. Kind of like matchmakers, they have the experience and relationships to connect you with people and homes that best serve your personality and your lifestyle. And with more than $1 billion sold, you can bet you'll be in good company. To connect with Richard Courtney and Lisa Peebles, visit NashvilleLuxuryEstates.com. We're talking about people who, in many cases, had lived in Nashville for decades. What did you hear from them?
Yeah, I spoke to a handful of people who said they worked in the restaurant industry. some in hospitality, many of them kind of doing the jobs like blue-collar jobs, whether it's preparing food. During the stop, some were telling me that they were just on their way to pick up a pizza for the family. So they were just people in the community who that night happened to be out and never made it home. It's fathers, grandparents, children. I spoke to a mother who says it was her son was detained, and she also didn't know that night that he had been stopped. And so she kind of went on a journey the next day to local police precinct. That's when she was told to maybe check out the ICE office. And she went there, and that was when she was finally able to confirm that her son had been detained. And so in a lot of these cases, it's family members kind of picking up the pieces and not knowing what comes next. And some of the people that they relied on financially who got stopped. So in this case, this mother, her story kind of just becomes a cycle of financial hardship after her son is detained. She ends up injuring her foot during the winter ice storm. Her pipes burst. She's struggling to pay rent. And this was all things that her son used to help her with. So now she's taken on extra people that rent rooms in her home. She's trying to find any way to kind of be able to make it.
How have people changed their lifestyles, if they have?
Yeah, in the immediate aftermath, I would say it was very strange to see some of these corridors that are vibrant kind of come to a complete standstill. Nolensville Pike, there was like maybe one car every 5 minutes. And so to me, those were the memories that most strike out, or like during that immediate week. It was just neighborhoods that were completely alone and shattered, when usually they're just like very frequented. And in Eduardo's case, he told me for his family, a lot of younger generations, like kids who were born here, have taken to perhaps do all of the grocery runs for their family in order to keep them safe. And that's just kind of what you're hearing throughout in the community, like people doing different rides for folks, or maybe driving them to work. After this happened, kind of some of the cases that we're seeing most of detainment is people going to work and are stopped at gas stations now. And so that's kind of how it's changed from the detentions that occurred in May to what's happening now is we've seen cases where it's people who are on their way to work in a work van, and 6 people get stopped and the car is still running at the gas station.
Stephen, we previously reported about people being detained here and then sent down to Louisiana or other places, but the story really gets more complicated once they're in these detention centers, and some of the details were pretty disturbing.
Yeah, we heard some really dark recollections from people. One person that we spoke with said that he personally witnessed multiple suspected suicide attempts in detention. But he was saying the people he was detained with were in such despair, either because they didn't really have a place to go home to for political or crime reasons, or even just for economic reasons. Their extended families had sold possessions or land to fund their one family member to go to the States to make money. And that had been a failure in a way because this person had been detained. There were multiple examples of that. We talked to people who lost weight in detention. They said that food and water was sometimes hard to come by. We talked to people who said that they were derided for speaking Spanish and only treated well, or their requests for medical attention were only responded to if they were able to speak in English. The son of the woman who's still here and is struggling to pay her rent, he said that he got an infection while he was in detention that he still has now, months later, is still recovering from and can't afford to go to a doctor back in El Salvador. So it's just a litany of different things.
Araceli, you interviewed a woman named Betsy Bet. I know she was pregnant when her partner was detained. Whatever happened to her and her family?
A Venezuelan mother who had been living in Nashville for 2 years, her partner 4 years. He's the one who went to go pick up the pizza that night. He gets detained, and spends months in custody. Meanwhile, Betsy Bet is pregnant. She has a 5-year-old daughter. And during the months of his detainment, she's struggling to pay for rent. She ends up having the baby, which her partner wasn't able to witness because he was detained. He was born prematurely, is anemic, and she ultimately decides that she needs to return home to Venezuela. So she willingly goes back and ends up arriving before her partner is deported there. So because of, I don't know, it just takes months to be able to process some of these deportations, she ends up being back in Venezuela before her partner, who was detained months earlier, gets there. And finally, they reunite, and she describes it as a super sweet moment because for the first time, he's able to see his son. Adrian is what they named him. And her life is really complicated now in Venezuela because of the U.S. military intervention that happened. And so she kind of is living in a weird world where she's like, I just left the U.S. and now I'm under their control again in a way. And ever since Maduro was captured, she says prices have increased for basic necessities. Her baby's formula is so expensive that she's had to resort to grinding spaghetti or grinding pumpkin and mixing it into her baby formula. And that's how she kind of keeps her baby fed because she says it's just so expensive and they're earning maybe $8 to $12 a day, and a baby formula is around $21. So she says they're just trying to do whatever it takes to keep her family fed. And now, because he is a U.S. citizen, she hasn't been able to get his Venezuelan passport. So they're exploring maybe perhaps going to a different country, Colombia, a neighboring or other Latin American countries, and she's unable to do so because her baby only has the U.S. Citizenship and his U.S. passport. So in order to translate all those documents, she says that she needs to pay around $100. And for right now, she says that's impossible because that money could be better spent on food.
Sarah Grace, I want to revisit the hunting comment that an ICE agent made that night on tape. What was the reaction to that from colleagues?
I mean, like with a lot of the stuff that they said, there was a very, I think I've described it to Stephen before as kind of like a fraternal thing, and they're putting Zins in their mouth and drinking Monster Energy and giggling at each other's jokes and listening to rap music and just, they're not, I don't think they're feeling the weight of some of the stuff that's being said. And so when the ICE agent is talking about hunting time, it's like slapping on the back and laughing and yeah, we gotta scoop up these other drivers that are coming and get back to it. They talk about another man who drives by, or another driver who comes by during this wait for the second car. They talk about a missed opportunity because they've somehow determined that vehicle looks like someone they might have arrested. There was a sport quality to it. And I think that was mostly what the reaction was. But also, this is not the only instance where an ICE agent says something throughout the night and seems to get a laugh. There's a gentleman who is a manager of a Mexican restaurant in Nashville, who stopped. And while he's detained and they're searching his car, an ICE agent sees his work uniform or badge in the front seat, the passenger seat. And he says, oh, he works at this Mexican restaurant, the guacamole's never going to be the same. And then they're all laughing and making jokes about guacamole. The trooper says, oh, I guess I'll add that to the list of restaurants I never go back to. And they're all just cutting up and laughing. And then they're interrupted by another ICE agent joining the scene, who comes and says, I might call them customers or Paco or Tango. And those are just different words for me. And then the trooper cuts him off and says, hey, I'm hot, referencing his body cam. And he still continues and says, those are just different messages I might send. The same ICE agent earlier in the stop says that these were nice ways to say illegals. So the law enforcement don't seem bothered by each other's conduct throughout the night, and there's a lot of laughing and kind of cutting up about it.
And at one point, the citation book or the clipboard or whatever they would use to write a legitimate ticket is thrown in the back seat of the car?
Yeah, I think one of the strongest evidences that this was not about public safety is the lack of citations. So I literally watched 52 hours of this, and I saw 5 citations be written. One trooper on the first stop maybe, or one of his first stops, says to the ICE agent, well, I'm not going to need this. I'm not out here to write tickets, and puts his clipboard in the back. Another trooper says, I can't remember the last time I stopped someone for a headlight. They weren't out there to make traffic stops. And then there were people, there's a middle-aged white guy in a Tesla who gets stopped. The trooper says, I might actually write a ticket on this one, because the guy was going, I think, 27 or 24 over the speed limit. He gets out, talks to the guy about cigars at the Knights of Columbus meeting he's been at, goes back, runs his license, and lets him off, even though it was a pretty high speeding ticket potential, right? So they were not out there making regular traffic stops.
I also just wanted to add, there was a moment in the video when Eduardo is stopped. He's pulled into a parking lot of an apartment complex near Harding Place, Nolensville, and Edmondson Pikes. And the trooper says something to the effect of, I think I'm just going to camp here all night. Have you seen the traffic coming in and out? It's crazy. Basically, he's saying, there's a lot of Latinos around here driving, so I'm just going to camp out right here, and I'll be able to find a lot of people.
Stephen, are there still any unknowns remaining? I remember early in the reporting, there were some cases where we didn't know where people ended up, and they were still unaccounted for. Are there any of those blanks still in the record?
There are more unknowns than knowns, I would say. I mean, we got a list of 150 or so people from these documents. Araceli was able to find several more, but that is in no way the complete list of people who were detained or even just stopped during that week. And many of the people that we were able to identify, we were not able to locate or contact. So there are dozens more stories like the ones that we've told you.
Now, I should say we have published our full list of questions for ICE in our story about the operation. Okay, so Sarah, tell me, what are the reasons given for the redactions?
Well, we didn't make this records request. Like we said, it came from the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, so we don't have that. They are currently in a lawsuit alleging that they over-redacted the footage and that they've slowed the process of releasing the footage, so we'll be curious to see what happens. But I know, because I requested the report Stephen mentioned earlier, the CAD reports, which are kind of incident reports written by troopers. We got those a few months ago. And trooper names and these kinds of details are redacted that are typically available in this kind of law enforcement document. And we've been pushing back on THP to very little response to some of the Tennessee code that we think they violated with some of these redactions. And like I mentioned, the contrast between how Metro released this video and THP raises questions of why would THP redact so much more heavily down to ICE agents' tattoos on their arms being blurred out. There's a lot of question of why this much is redacted, and it genuinely might take months or years to get those answers. But that's part of the problem, because how much good does getting that later do for the families that have already, people have been deported and these things have already happened, and if you were going to file a lawsuit for being profiled or whatever is going to happen, there are time limits on that. So the redaction is pretty questionable, but also flawed. One thing is that they wouldn't give us trooper names, but this is a lot of hours of footage, and I managed to get 7 of the 8 trooper names out of that footage, where they just didn't redact them fully or at all in certain spots.
And you've got to wonder whether this is going to have a chilling effect on the way law enforcement acts when cameras are on and how often they're turned off in the course of a stop.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention that, because one particular video is much longer than the stop, because a trooper errantly leaves his dash cam footage on, but it's his last stop of the night. So he's sitting in there doing his paperwork, and he calls 2 different people, I think both troopers, but one of them we know was a trooper, from this stop. And that's when the trooper says that he was shipping people back to damn Honduras and stuff, and then they brag about their total arrest for the night. So they almost summarize the whole point that we were going after in this one call, where they accidentally left the dash cam footage on, which on the one hand is validating for why it was worth going through what we did, but also says it raises the question, how much is still in what's redacted and how much did they say once they turned the cameras off?
As reporters, we always learn something from big operations like this and going through data this specifically.
I do think what we saw, the markings, the competing, that kind of thing, makes me question, even if THP didn't sign up for this, which we know ICE asked them to do it, how did THP respond when they saw some of this conduct or heard about it? We know that the stop slowed down throughout the week, and anecdotally, of course, some of that is the community staying at home because they knew that this was happening. But we also know that they ended up not doing a shift that Sunday night into Monday morning after there were protests and after some of this got out there. So I wonder how much did THP learn from this when they then signed up for the 287G program the same week?
I think going back to an earlier discussion about the initial statements made by both THP and ICE about the operation and what they'd accomplished and what the purpose of it was, I think it's always good for us to be reminded not to trust those things at face value and to pull at the threads that are in there. I mean, it's been 9 months and we're still finding discrepancies in what they told us, and that's just a good reminder for all of us going forward.
I think follow-ups are very important. Some of the people I spoke with, I had stayed connected with since that protest on Sunday morning at the Brick Church Pike location. And people in our story that you guys can read, it was the trust that you've earned because you've been able to stay in contact with them for so long that months later in Venezuela, they're willing to talk to you so comfortably about what happened. So yeah, I would say follow up with your sources.
And I think that's a great point, Araceli, and that's why your work was so valuable to this project. And I also think that once there's a big news event that we're all paying attention to, all the TV stations are there, all the newspapers, even the national media is coming in to talk about this, it kind of fizzled after a week or two, a month, but there was all this other stuff to be found out. And so months down the road, a year down the road, it's important to think about those people and say what's happened to those people since then. Even if we've moved on, the media cycle has moved on, there's still people out there who are feeling the effect of it.
Thank all of you for the many hours of work and the fine reporting on this story.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, DK.
Those were reporters Sarah Grace Taylor, Stephen Elliott, and Araceli Crescencio. Read our two-part investigation at NashvilleBanner.com. Banner & Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode was produced by Andrea Tudhope. The original music is by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you for listening.